Welcome to Chai with Ping. This is Ping Robert. In this podcast, I cover immigrant stories, cross-cultural experiences, and minority issues. Join me with a cup of chai and take a listen. Are you ready, Emily?
Oh, yes. Okay.
All right, I'm gonna do the intro.
How?
Welcome back to Chai with Ping. My name is Ping. Thank you so much for tuning in my show, and welcome if you're here for the first time, and welcome back if you're a returning listener. I want to encourage you all listeners, please do subscribe and follow my show on whatever you listen to this podcast from, and then click that button, then you will get a new notification every time I release a new episode. And also, I'm available on Facebook and Instagram or email, so you can just search Chai with Ping. It will be there. And also, all the links will be in the episode notes. Recently, I have been waiting for some of the reviews from you guys, so please do show some love, encouragement on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or just DM me directly. So that is it. And then today we have a cool collaboration with Ghost Island Media. So this guest, she's from Taiwan. She grew up in Taipei, Taiwan, and then moved away to the US when she was about 12 years old. So when she was practicing English, learning a new culture and some very cool American sports that we probably will talk about. And during her time in the US, and she lived in Michigan, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and New York City. She moved back to Asia in 2017 after her college, and then started working in television and journalism industry. And then her experiences are very diverse. She is the co-founder of Ghost Island Media, and it is a company which produces multilingual podcast network based in Taiwan. And also, there are just so many topics that they cover about, and they also they were nominated for a few podcast awards in Taiwan. So let's welcome the special guest, Emily Y. Ooh.
Thank you so much. Hello, Ping. Good to be here.
Definitely.
What an introduction.
Did you write that up?
Well, there's one correction, and I'm like, did I mistype it? I probably did. I came back to Asia in 2007, not 2017.
Oh, that's probably my verbally mistaken thing. So yeah, I'll definitely correct that. Quite a bio. Like, you have so much going on in your life.
Yeah, and I wish I had done all that in 5 years.
Would you know? That's a lot. So at the age of 12, let's start with a little of your background, right? So you grew up in Taipei, and so both your parents are Taiwanese.
Mm-hmm.
And then why did you all of a sudden go to the US?
So growing up in Taiwan in the 80s and the 90s, we always knew that we would end up in the States for school at some point. Was it graduate school? Was it college? We didn't know. But because my father had gotten his PhD in Chicago in the early 80s, and he really liked the experience. He really liked the American education system, the kind of the resources on an American campus, the type of teacher-student relationship that you can have there, the kind of the encouragement to exploring, right, your interests. Like, he loved that. So he really wanted us to be exposed to that at some point. I would start learning English, just by going to cram school like everybody else. But then there were always books at home. We're kind of, we're always watching American TV or listening to American music. And so the exposure was always there. And one day my father got he got a visiting fellowship to the University of Michigan in the mid 90s. And that's when we thought, okay, well, let's go together. And then we never came back. I never came back.
I know you have an older brother, right? Was he
Correct.
with you guys as well?
Yeah, he was. He's three years older by academic years. Yes, he was. But then, so we went to Michigan together, but then we split. My parents came back after Michigan, and my brother and I started going to different boarding schools from there on. Different schools. I mean, right?
Was it a different level? Like, you're in junior high and he was in high school?
Yeah. So I went to middle school in Hawaii, and then my brother went straight on to high school in New England.
Got it. I thought like a lot of Asian parents would just send their kids to the same area, but like for you guys were split in a very young age.
Yeah, I think they probably tried,
Yeah.
but there was very few boarding middle schools in the US at
Okay.
the time. So we didn't really have that much
Oh,
options for me.
got it.
But then in high school, I transferred over to another school in New England and kind of was the same area as him.
Okay, got it, got it. But still, you guys were in different boarding schools, I
Correct.
assume.
Correct.
Ah,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it was close enough. It was close
Yeah.
enough. Like he was in New Hampshire, I was in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
and then he went to Connecticut for college, and I stayed in Massachusetts because so it was all there. It was all
Yeah.
2 hours away.
But do you visit each other a lot?
We did a couple of times, yeah.
A couple of times in a year.
Yeah.
Do you know your brother?
Yeah, it was quite fun. Or like I remember I piggybacked off of some sports teams that was having an away game at his school to like hop on the bus with him, just like to go say hi. So I remember that. Or sometimes for short breaks, I would see him at his college.
Yeah.
Like short breaks like Thanksgiving or something like that. Yeah.
Got it. And
yeah, so we would make opportunities.
Yes.
But it was definitely like you had to really work for it.
Yeah. Did your parents visit you often or like once a year, that kind of thing?
They tried when they could. Yeah. So for the summer, we usually came back to Taiwan in the summer. So maybe in the winter they would come.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like around Christmas time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about sports because I heard on some other show that you mentioned you play football. Is that right?
So rugby.
Oh wait, what?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I thought it was just different. I also did crew in high school, rowing.
Yeah.
But then I also did, kind of more familiar things like basketball or track.
Yeah.
But rugby was something that it was actually not like, it's not as violent as you think. There's a very specific, not skills, very specific ways of falling.
Mm-hmm.
And you train to fall also.
Okay.
And so it's actually like, as much as you get hurt in rugby, you might broke a collarbone. I never I didn't. And it was also it was my first year in college, and it was a really good way of meeting new friends.
Okay.
And I really liked the girls on the team. I thought they were so cool.
Yeah.
So that was a way of just like meeting upper class women in the way that you wouldn't in class.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're taking a bunch of one-on-one classes. And so it was much of a social activity for me and a really different sport. And so that was great fun. Yeah. So I did it for 3 semesters and got to see, it was club sport for us, but during one of the away games, we got to see some really, really good teams. It was like a men's UVA versus U Michigan, I think, and they play in the mud, and it was so fun to watch. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it true that it's more fun to watch guys play than girls?
I wouldn't say that. I think it's different. They play differently. I mean, I think they say that for a lot of sports, right? That
especially
men,
football. Yeah.
Yeah, that men tend to be they're fast, but I think the way that men and women play sports, I think it's just different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Why didn't you choose football though?
Oh no, my school didn't. No, I went to a women's college, so we didn't have a football program, and so it was rugby.
Interesting, because I thought rugby was a more like British side of the sports.
Yeah. In New England too, there's a lot of rugby.
So during those years when growing up, were you one of the minoritized, being Asian, right, in your school? Did you see a lot of diversity at school?
Yeah, it was odd because in Hawaii, so in Michigan, I think in retrospect, I was always blessed to be in places where there was already a good diversity. So in Michigan, we were in Ann Arbor, which is in a college town, right? So I remember some of my friends were other international students whose parents were also professors or PhDs at the college. That was when I met my first Korean friend and my first friend from Nepal. And then when I went to Hawaii, that was also a very multicultural place. But the funny thing about Hawaii was that when I was in middle school, there was not many Taiwanese at the time. It was in my year, it was this other girl and me, and this one guy 1 year above us, so like a 学长. And he he wouldn't let us speak Mandarin. He hated it. He thought it made us look bad. And he was like, speak whatever you want, like in private, but in public, don't speak Mandarin, speak English.
Wow.
And we're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But actually, thanks to him, like my English got so good in that 1 year because I basically, the two of us, my girlfriend and I, we didn't speak much Mandarin at all. And so by the next year, I was I ever in ESL classes? I don't think I ever was. Somehow Antonio, thank you.
Wow. And that was in junior high.
That was in junior high. And by the time I got to high school, it just happened to be it was the biggest boarding school at the time in the US, with a really large international students population. So the awareness, the diversity and awareness was always there. But it wasn't until college that I would meet Asian Americans who said, hey, look, I grew up in the middle of nowhere as the only Asian person in my town. And in college, they wanted to meet more Asian Americans. It was almost a reverse for us, where for international students, you wanted to, or you needed to even to get to know the American culture, and they were the flip. They were like, I got to know my Asian roots, so that was very, very interesting to see that. And that was, I think, the first time that I started to see things from an Asian American perspective and realize how different that experience was from us.
For you, I think you're 1.5 generation. Yeah. And then for the Asian Americans, they're like second generation, right? So then there's still differences between you guys and them, because like the childhood experience is different.
Yeah, a lot.
Family too. Yeah. Do people treat you differently by how you look?
Where?
Like maybe it sounds like in junior high and high school, it's like there's a lot of diversity. So not as many domestic students. So what about college?
No, the majority was still domestic students. But in Hawaii, the dominant group socially were the local kind of Hawaiians.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. And And in high school, was there a dominant? Yeah. Diversity there was so many Caucasian students, a lot of Black students. It was, the school really prided itself in diversity. And it could, because for a school of 1,300 people, you could have a really, really interesting pool of students. Did they see us differently? Probably
not, because it doesn't stick out, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, no. I would say what was interesting to me was stepping outside of the campus environment. When I got to college, I could kind of go to Boston more on my own. So my school is about a half hour outside of Boston. And then, or eventually when I was in New York, and seeing how the rest of America saw us, or how other immigrants saw us. And at the time, in the early 2000s, it was actually really friendly. Like, it was very different from what I hear now about the type of Asian hate that's going around. And that's so sad to see, to hear. But in the early 2000s, that really wasn't my experience. And I'm really thankful for that.
But then you went to a women's college. Why? How did you make that choice?
It was a good school. That's it. It was a very good school.
Is it also because of the major that you chose?
No, not at all. It was just a very good school. I kind of knew I wanted to do arts, but I didn't know if that was the only thing I wanted to do. So I went to liberal arts. So in the end, I was deciding, I remember applying to a lot of schools, and a bunch of them were women's colleges just for some reason.
Yeah.
And I ended up in one, and it was an excellent school. And I think I had to get used to the fact that it was all women. Like, I forget sometimes. I remember, I think it was like my second semester, I walk into a math class and I just go, whoa, it's all women here. And then it hit me, wait, this is a women's college. But in retrospect, I think it was a really good decision. I think being at a women's college at that level, I mean college level, me and our classmates, a head start in thinking about gender equality, social justice. It was like I actually didn't take any women's studies classes all 4 years, but I felt like just being there, what made a big difference and had a big impact. Not that it made a big difference, but it had a big impact on me.
I heard lots of women's college, they're very feminist. Is that how you felt?
Define that.
It's like a lot of professors, or they're like, well, women should be strong, and then we shouldn't be pushed down or oppressed, and we fight for our rights. That kind of opinion.
Yeah. There was much of that, and there was a heightened awareness of the gender stereotypes in society to girls, right? So till now, I'm still giving people a hard time, jokingly, be like, somebody will describe their colleague. They'll be like, oh yeah, that girl at the office. Yeah. Now, and I would say, girl, oh, you have a 12-year-old at your office? Like, they're like, no, the girl. I'm like, oh, right, women, right?
Yeah.
But I think what was cool about that experience was that because at that environment, like where's all women, every leadership position was filled by a woman.
Yes.
And so when you graduate, you actually walk away with tons of experience.
Yeah.
And so everybody was the head of the president of a club. If you're right, everybody was the founder of something, everybody, right? Every position was filled by a woman. So you had a lot of practice being in leadership and positions. And I think that practice, when you graduate and enter the work life in your career, I think that probably give us somewhat of an advantage, at least in the early start, I would say.
It kind of empowers you to be at a leadership position and to think more broadly how you want to lead an organization or team, huh?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So you chose liberal arts and then later probably focused on arts. Why? How did you find out you like arts? Because I know a lot of listeners of mine, they sometimes ask me the questions like, I don't really know what I want to do, or like what I like. I know what I don't like, but then I don't know what I want to do with my life and what I like in college as a subject.
We were always encouraged to explore our passions and really like love what we learn. And so while I knew that I liked art, I didn't know why I liked it. I just liked doing it, right? Arts and craft. It's just fun. But I shopped around actually a lot to a lot of departments. Like at some point I want to be a classics major. Like I was fascinated by Roman life and like the empires. At some point I thought actually Africana studies is so interesting. I know nothing about it. Like I want to learn all about it. What was it? Yeah, geology. I thought rocks were so cool at some point. So I shopped around in a lot of departments. But then what I realized was actually doing art was what I loved. Like I was just so happy doing it. And that art itself wasn't the end. Art was just the medium in how you make a statement about something, right? So then my final thesis project, not thesis, my final project, I didn't do a thesis. My final project, it was like a mixed media, but it was about this is when Taipei 101 was just being built. And I just thought it was like, that's so interesting. This is the first skyscraper in Taiwan, and like it's not even filled. It has a really interesting design. So I ended up making my thesis again. Sorry, not thesis. I ended up making my final project all about the significance of skyscrapers and like starting from the Tower of Babel and like what skyscrapers mean to us, right? So like art was a way of expression, but it's not that. That's not the end itself. And so I really love that. I love that I could explore a topic and use whether it's video or sculpture or drawing or just writing a story. I took a lot of creative writing classes to communicate that concept or that whatever I have in mind.
That is so cool. And then I wonder, because you have this bicultural, bilingual aspect, does it shape how you create?
Maybe. That's probably, ask me again in 20 years. I think that's probably that probably changes as our relationship with our host countries and our present active language changes, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
So it probably changes it.
Yeah.
How, I don't know I can articulate at this point. So we can come back to that in 10 years. That's not 20, 10 or 20 years.
Yeah. Do you feel like, so you were in the US for like more than 10 years, right? So did you feel at home?
No, it was a big struggle. I think early on as an international student, like you struggle to fit in.
Yeah.
You don't know the culture. Like I hated Halloween, right? You know, I'm like, what is this?
Wait, what happened to Halloween? So many kids like Halloween.
I hated Halloween because I felt like in school with the social pressure, like you had to be cool, you had to
dress up.
I don't know, dress. Well, just every day you had to be cool. Every day you had to, because at the time, like Asian things weren't celebrated as much in the States. People just didn't know so much about it. Like it was weird to them. Now it's cool. Now like boba's cool or whatever. Japanese manga is cool. At the time, nobody knew about it, so it wasn't. So it was weird. So like, if you wanted to, or at least that was what I felt, was that okay, you have to like do all these American things or like whatever, or get to know them to be able to assimilate. It wasn't the other way around. And so you feel like you're just constantly like learning, which is great. But then like, oh, what is this? What is this? Like being out of touch with things. I thought Halloween was such a hypocrisy because the spirit of the Halloween was, be whatever you want, right? Like celebrate creativity. But what I thought at the time was, but not really, because that even then needed to subscribe to American values. It needed to be cool in American eyes. It needed to be creative in the American eyes. So there was still this rule to it, and it wasn't that all you can be. So I was like, but I was doing this every day. Why is there a day to celebrate the fact that we're all trying to fit in, right? So I hated it. But I think over time, through probably high school. Yeah, I think starting in high school, you started embracing like what you have and who you are, and started to be proud of who you are, and like started to be able to be comfortable with sharing the world with what you love and be comfortable with being weird. So that took a while.
That took a while, but I was surprised that even at the earlier age, like in junior high or high school, that you already differentiate their racial differences, and it's like the mainstream culture, and you're trying to acculturate. I think that's the word, assimilate to the mainstream. And then it's like, it's not like you're happily doing that, because I know that a lot of kids might just like blindly go into that trend and then become someone else. But then you recognize that shift, and also you're kind of resisting it.
I kind of just felt like I had to do it, right? And I think being boarding school, you can't run away from it. It's there 24/7. Like you're living with it too. Like your roommates are Americans, right? Whereas I would wonder if I was an immigrant at the time living at home, I could have time off from that, right? When I come home, it might be a refuge. So yeah, and also middle school is tough. Middle school is just cruel. Everywhere in the world, middle school is cruel.
Yeah. Did they do anything or say anything to you?
No, not really. No. I think it was just hard, because also I came like in Taiwan, I was fine. Like I was comfortable. I had tons of friends, right? Yeah. So and then once you shift a country, shift a culture, shift a language, you're like all of a sudden at the bottom. And so that was like, what do I do now? Okay, now, right. So I think that was quite, yeah. Nothing in particular, like I didn't get bullied or anything, like nothing in particular, but it just, that pressure was quite tough, I thought.
Yeah. I can feel like maybe I do understand a part of how you felt, because after coming here 4 years ago, I feel like my personality shifted a little bit because I become more quiet. I'm very loud in Taiwan. And so people say that, oh, you're just like American. But then I'm like, no, I'm not American. I'm not ABC. But then here, I reserve myself so much more because I literally don't know a thing. In class, on the streets, or just like talking to domestic people. When they mention something that I'm supposed to know, I'm like, I have no idea. Like even like Uber drivers will say something. It's like, oh, the game or no. I'm like, sorry, I'm not from here. What does it mean? And it's just like it kind of lower my my self-esteem a lot more. Then I become more observant and also kind of like super sensitive in a way.
Yeah, it took me a long time until I think finally in high school I was able to say, wait, yeah, I don't get that reference. Tell me about it. Like just that sounds so easy now and obvious now, but that took a long time to have that courage to even admit to somebody, to an American friend that like, yeah, I grew up differently from you. Like I don't know what that is. But it turned out they were fine with it. Yeah, they were like, oh yeah, oh man, you missed out, right? They were like, you missed out. Let me catch you up.
That takes a lot of confidence to actually ask, right? It's like we need to be comfortable enough to really ask the question.
Yeah. And that probably just takes a lot of practice, I think. A lot of practice, I would say, probably. Even in your native language, in your home or birth home, it probably I still see it. Like I've been teaching some kids in the past year, anywhere from like fourth grader to a senior in high school.
Wow. Okay.
And it's just I don't have a clue, but it's some are incredibly confident. Others, you're like, oh, I can see that. Like you'll break out of that shell and probably next year. Probably.
Yeah. Can we talk about a little bit about your friend making or social life at that time in the US?
Okay.
10 years is a lot of time.
Yeah.
Do you make like very important friends, or still that kind of awkwardness is there even after a decade?
No. I made a lot of really good friends. I think being at boarding school, you are there to make really deep friendships because that's all you have. I would imagine if it wasn't the case, it would have been a very lonely experience. I think I made all sorts of friends. Like I did come into like 4 years of high school. Initially, I didn't make friends with a lot of the Taiwanese students. I just thought like, that's not the thing to do. Right. Like, I'm going to, try this and try that and be in these different classes or activities that Asian students normally didn't participate in. And then eventually at some point I would realize like, oh, wow, this is so comforting to be with your own kind.
Oh, yes. Especially you guys are going through similar stage, right?
Yeah. And just, going back to cultural references, there was I still remember this. Like, remember, it was like a Friday night dinner or something. Normally I remember eating with my group of Taiwanese friends at the time, and the jokes that we were making, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to ask anything. We don't have to explain anything. We just like know it, right? This feels like home. This feels so good. And so that came in kind of halfway through. And then I started to be able to mix my kind of the groups more. At the time there was a Taiwanese teacher on campus who was teaching Chinese, and she was amazing. She would organize like New Year's Eve dinners, like at her apartment. Because that's a big festival for us, right? Like was it Dongwujie? Probably also Dongwujie, but also Lunar New Year's.
Yeah, 春节.
And we would go to her apartment and like make dumplings and hot pot, just something easy. But that was something that she didn't have to do, right? But she just like took up that role, that mentor role. And it was like, hey kids, like come and celebrate. Like we're far away from home, but we're still together. Like here's a piece of home for you.
Love that. Yeah. I feel like those are the festivals and times that makes me like miss home more, and also kind of identified I am not actually from here. So I need to find someone that I can share this joy for this festival or this food with me at that time. It's very
and
important.
Also like I made a lot of good friends with fellow international students too. And so that was really, really fun. And like I think because also as boarding, at that age, you kind of they're friends you choose later on, right? Like by senior or high school. But then early on, it's the people you're put with, right? People down your hall. So like a couple of my American friends down like in my cluster of where we lived, they ended up being like they're incredible dancers in New York now. This Caucasian woman and this Black woman. And my roommate at some point, she said that she's actually a descendant of the Mayflowers, and she's now in the Navy. So that was really fun. And I almost saw her like a couple of years ago. But then I had a Japanese roommate for a couple of years. Like she's still in New York. A really good friend of mine was a Indian Japanese mix. His family was just so kind to us, like because I think them being also immigrants and international students at the time. Like the father went to MIT. I think they really understood kind of what we felt. So they kind of took us in. And they were incredible. Yeah, great family. So we also got to, it wasn't just in school. We also got to know their families, and like sometimes on short holidays and vacations, got to visit their homes, like being outside of the campus.
Yeah. Sweet.
And a lot of the Taiwanese students are back now in Taiwan. So I see them once in a while too. Yeah.
So since you already talk about like moving and all that, so after college as an international student, you probably only have 1 year, right? To work in the US. So what did you do?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to do production or TV. Actually, at the time I thought it was TV because I wanted to put I was even though I studied art in school, I was interning at newspapers. So I knew I wanted to do journalism. So you put journalism and production and art together, and that's TV production. So I almost went to LA, but I didn't drive. And I thought, getting a driver's license, finding a place like in 1 month, that was, too much. So I went to New York instead and loved it. I worked at a couple places, a documentary film house, and then like a PR news agency workhouse for a while. But then it was kind of my OPT was running out, and I had to make a decision of whether to apply for a work visa or to go somewhere else. And I think it was a combination of that like, okay, at the time, like you're 22, you have under 1 year of professional work experience. It's very tough to get a work visa like that. But I thought that I had, I couldn't see that. I mean, I'm thankful of the company that I was with, but I don't think that I wanted to be there for another year. And then, right. And it wouldn't have been fair to say, hey, sponsor me, and then be like, all right, I'm going to move on. Right. And because also I think for me, the advice that I had gotten for your first job out of college was stay as long as you think you can learn and then move on quickly. And then for the second or the third place, that's when you stay for the long haul. But then also at the time I was 12 years away from Taiwan, really. I would go home for summers, but I didn't know it as a place to live. So I thought, all right, let's go home and check it out and reconnect with Taiwan and really live there and see what it's like. And maybe one day, come back to the States for graduate school.
Was it an easy decision? I mean, like just kind of cutting up the whole 12 years of experience and then move to Taiwan, which similarly like home, but also you were not there for 12 years.
Yeah. It wasn't as final as it sounds at the time. At the time, I just thought, okay, for a couple of years, and then we can come back to do graduate school or maybe for a job, to come back again. So there was never this finale to it. So I think that probably made it easier. And then, otherwise it was like fine because I already had friends in Taiwan too, friends I had made throughout my just years of coming back to Taiwan in the summer. And so it wasn't like going to a new place, right? It wasn't like that type of decision. It was like, okay, for now, let's go back for now and see what happens.
Yeah. Was there a reverse culture shock?
Yeah, for a while. I was constantly, I was constantly being called out for like, oh, you're not from here.
Wait, what? I was like,
what?
What happened?
I think it was those, well, okay. So mid 2000s in Taiwan, context is that there's some expats in Taiwan, a lot of second gens, most second gens haven't come back yet. So it was still this like, it was still quite exotic, I guess, to have somebody who spent time abroad and now come back. And I probably like my Mandarin probably had a bit of an accent maybe, although I still get it now. So I don't think it's that. I think it's just the way I speak. But I had to get my Mandarin up to a professional level. And so that took some work. Practicing my Mandarin and getting up to professional level, like that took some work, like active, like brain hurting work.
Wait, so reading was okay, right? Just speaking is a little rough.
Reading's fine. Speaking wasn't rough. It's just because I wasn't used to speaking in all Mandarin or I wasn't used to professional Mandarin. Right. So I was very...
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I just had to keep practicing. And so I think at some point there was somebody across a different department. Oh, also, like I was the youngest in the department at the time. So like people were joking with you. You kind of get made fun of. It's okay. It's all in fun spirit. Like I didn't mind it. That was okay. Like, but I remember there was one guy from a different department. I was on the phone with him talking about something. And this was like 2 years into my work at that place. And at some point he was like, I think he called me specifically to say, I'm really sorry. And I'm like, whoa, what happened? He goes, I just found out that you had just come back from the States 2 years ago. I said, yes. He said, okay, that explains a lot of things. I just want to say I'm sorry. And that explains it. Okay, so you're like 美国人, right? You're American. So, okay, that explains a lot. I was like, what?
Oh, yes. They become more forgiving when they know your background, huh?
So there must have been something different. Like it was, something different about the way I have no idea. I thought it was kind of rude. So I actually didn't ask, he meant it, right? It was out of kindness. He said it, but the incident would be like, oh yeah. To kind of like, yeah, you're so different that you're whatever. I was like, wait, what?
And then you still don't know why.
I don't know what happened. But then years later, I would be at a different company. And I remember somebody said, wait, what? Wait, you didn't grow up here? I had no idea. I was like, okay, this is 5 years back win, finally. I was so happy.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So even now, like I've left Taiwan for 4 years. And then when I went back in 2019, before COVID, I already felt there was a disconnection between me and the mainstream culture. Because a lot of the things they're talking about, I already don't know. Because I don't read news every day from Taiwan, right? I have to catch up here in the US. And then maybe weekly, I will follow up the news in Taiwan. But then it's just like pop culture, food, even the languages, slangs are different. I'm like, what does it mean? So wow. Yeah. To catch up on that.
I still don't know all the pop artists, but at some point I just... Yeah, but then I had learned how to ask and say, wait, who's that? Oh, who are they? What are they famous for? Like, oh, I gotta check that out. Okay, and it all becomes a part of research.
Got it. How long did you work in Taiwan then? Because I know that at some point you went to Shanghai.
Yeah, so I was back for about 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
And then I left again. I was with kind of big companies at the time. And then I left and I went freelancing. I was in Beijing and then Hong Kong and Shanghai. And so that together was 5 years.
Yeah.
Up until I decided to come back to Taiwan again this time around. And so that was 3 years ago.
Wow. So all these years you're doing TV productions. Is that right?
Production-ish, video production. Yeah. Not always TV.
Okay.
Some were, film, documentaries, corporate filmmaking. It was a mix. It was anything that had to do with the visuals.
Do you always feel that passionate about like media and production and all? Because I know that in this kind of industry, it moves so fast, right? The pace is fast, and then every minute that you're filming or making videos, it's money. So how do you keep that passion?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different parts of it. What you described is the filming being on set. And I think there's a certain type of magic there. And it's adrenaline because it's, you prepped all this time for the costumes, for the sets, for getting the actors. And then it's now, right? Like there's something really special about that. I remember the first time I witnessed that the special, like the magic of filmmaking, or at least being on set. It was my first year in college, and they were filming a Hollywood film there. And I remember standing across, like on the big school lawn, which is called the Greens. And there was a line of production crew, producers, directors, assistants, all in their chairs and their gears. And they kind of all lined up nicely. In front of them, I was where I was standing was what year was this? 2002, 2003. And then on the other side of the line was like the 60s. Everybody was in 60s clothes, 60s like vibe. And that was incredibly cool to see that magic and that transformation. You're like, wait, you could create time capsules like that? You could create a different reality just like that? Like, that was so cool to me. And it's still really cool to me now. But for now, so I didn't end up doing, directing or costume or set design. I really loved set design. I ended up on the producer and writing track. But when I was at the animation studio, when I was in Taiwan, like we got to work with modelers to create that set like virtually. So that was really fun. So you could write, like when you write a story, you could decide like, oh, in this scene, there's going to be this and that. There's going to be like this headphones here. There's going to be like that hula hoop there. I'm going to put like a fish there just for no reason because it's a joke. Like you get to design that reality, and it's really, really cool. Yeah.
What were some memorable examples that you still just kind of you're so impressed with those incidents or times or moments?
Of the creation or
just during these years in your career?
There's so many.
I know, because you get to meet so many different people and
yeah,
stories and different productions. What impacted you the most?
That's really hard to say. They're so different. I mean, I think for me, what really stands out really is just the early years. It was a lot of learning because you're learning from the best producers, the best directors, and you're not really your contribution is whatever skill set you have, whether it's language skills, so you're translating, or the fact that you're really organized, so you end up being the keeper of that budget is summarizing because you're really organized, so they trust you with it, or like. And because of that, there was a production. I was just an assistant, like production assistant, coordinator person, pretty low level in the food chain of productions. In a setting like that, I think in other settings that's like a really important high position. But at the time, it was like I knew nothing. I just came out of school. Like I came here to learn and kind of put in my time. And I found ourselves like that production, that documentary took us to like Japan. We got to visit the only North Korean university outside of Korea. And that was in Japan.
What?
And it was fascinating.
Is it still there?
It's still there. Yeah.
Wow.
So what happened was after the war, there was already a lot of Korean expats in Japan, and they needed to pick whether their allegiance was with the South or the North. And what the North did was they said, we're going to build schools and you're going to have free education. You still live in Japan, but you're going to have free education and you're North Korean. So there's a group of Koreans in Japan who were a part of that. And so there's a lot of kind of different lower level schools, but there was only one university that took them all. And so you step in and there's like, it looked like what you would, images of North Korea. And the different great leaders, on the wall. Fascinating. Yeah. We were there to look for a bird expert, and he was so cool. And then, that same production, we tried to apply to the DMZ, because the bird that we were documenting, like they also breed at DMZ, but we couldn't get in because us being Taiwanese, we just couldn't get in. We tried, we applied to a bunch, and in the end we got up to the fence, like from the Korea side. So that was like, what in the world, like would another 24-year-old be able to travel like that and do something like that? And so I think in the early years, it was just like eyes wide open, being awed about everything, and like, wow, wait, this is the world. Like, this is okay. So you kind of get the sense that, all right, so now, if you've learned enough and now you're in a position to conceive projects of your own, and then it opens up to the possibilities of later on.
And after those years, I know that you came back to Taiwan again and started your own company, Ghost Island Media. You want to move away from video making to audio production, right? And I guess part of the reason is because the budget. The funding is a big issue. But then I'm curious, because you did some of the programs in English, which is like, this is a Taiwanese founded company, but why English programs? And how does your cultural identities and background shape what you do in this company?
Yeah, language was always, even though as I got back to Taiwan the very first time, with the documentary and with the animation house, I was always in this, what you would call the international department. And it was always the global facing department. So there was always, our products were always bilingual, even though maybe the work environment was Mandarin based because we were in Taiwan. But then we would have, when we work with our international collaborators, right? So it was always using dual languages. So that was always there, like that. I was always on that track, doing international collaborations or co-productions or international facing. So you had to be in different languages. But when I was on the last, like, from 2013 to 18, I was on the road this time around. I think Hong Kong made a big impression on me, because in Hong Kong, I got to see how you could do bilingual production very, very well. Hong Kong at the time, the amount of English has been stripped away since then. But at the time, it was still very much bilingual. Everything was still English-based. And you realize, oh, wow, right, to do communications right, you need to be in different languages. And that was really interesting practice. And we got to work on some really fun projects at the time too. But then, so when those projects were so expensive. And so when I wanted to come back to Taiwan and thought, I want to do something, right? Like, but what can I do alone? Like by myself. At the time, it was just by myself. Abandoning video was a very, very, very easy decision. And going, audio only and like the information only. But there were things that I wanted to communicate, and some of it just needed to be in English because I really wanted to have Taiwan more in global conversations. It was. I think, when I'm talking to friends, I mean, it is a part of a conversation, but officially, not really, right? Like, we're not a part of the UN. Like, at the time, it was still tough to have coverage of Taiwan in like the front pages of international newspapers without it being an election, missiles or TSMC. But I was coming back to Taiwan and meeting people, and like there were just so many interesting things happening. So English became our first show, became the language of our first show. And then later on, we would swap Mandarin, and then we would have an equal number of English and Mandarin. Over the last year, we had more Mandarin shows. Earlier this year, we released a French podcast.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the Mandarin name is 法台漫游, and the French name I'm going to try. It's called Ballades Culturelle Franco-Taïwanese. Oh my. French is so long ago. But like, why French?
Well, I also took French in school, in high school, and I still don't speak French.
But then why all of a sudden between English and Mandarin programs and there is a French program?
Yeah. Well, that's all because we got into a collaboration with the French office in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And they wanted to talk about cultural collaborations. Because what happens is, like, a part of their office, what they do is they bring French artists to Taiwan and kickstart major collaborations with institutions in Taiwan. And over the past 2 years, over COVID, people were still coming. There was still work being done, but it was hard to have public screenings. It was hard to do public communication. Just, kind of COVID changed a lot of how they did things, or events were hard to run. And so podcasts became a way of documenting it. And so in the end, we spoke to 5 sets of artists. There are musicians, music producers. There was a VR director, a theater director, and the director and actors of an upcoming movie. And they were all, these French artists. They had, they would come to Taiwan to do maybe residencies or shoot a film, but they worked a lot with local collaborators. So it's about their experience working kind of cross culture and then telling us about their work. So I thought it was great because I love that topic, right? Like, kind of grew up having to do culture collaborations all my life. So I thought that was wonderful. And then to be able to talk to so many different kinds of artists, like, that was fascinating. Yeah. So when that opportunity came, we jumped on it and said, okay, let's do it. But then the challenge now is that, okay, now we have a French version, but we also needed the Taiwanese listeners to be able to understand it. So what do you do? So we ended up making additional Mandarin track versions too. So every interview, there's 2 files. It's the same podcast feed, but then they alternate a French interview and then the Mandarin adaptation, the Mandarin translation.
Yes.
Dubbed. Sorry.
Yeah. And then it's not just purely dubbed. It's also, you added some of the background and context behind these interviews, and then give it a fuller picture to the Taiwanese audience.
Yeah. So I replaced the host. And in doing so, I do it's more of a storytelling, and I sometimes give more backgrounds. Other times I leave it as it is, if it's fine. But the interview, the guest, that's purely just dubbed.
Yeah. I listened to it today. I was like, whoa, this is very cool, because I've never heard programs like that. It's basically, you take one thing and then you reproduce it in a different language, but also adding some different elements to it. So if you're a Mandarin or a French listener, please do, check it out. This program, I'll put the links in the episode note. I know that Ghost Island Media also produce other English programs. Is there anyone that you would like to recommend for English listeners?
Yes, there's so many. I'll run through them quickly just because they're quite easy to explain, right? Actually, there was one that I co-host with Freddie Lim, the metal musician legislature, and that's called Metalhead Politics. It's very short. It's six episodes, limited season, limited series, but it's on metal music and Taiwanese history. And for more current affairs, there's Taiwan Take. It's that one's been on hiatus for a while, but now brings us to the one that I really want to talk about, which is, it's called Waste Not, Why Not? It's our climate podcast on sustainability. Yeah,
also one of the oldest.
The oldest. Yeah.
The oldest. Okay.
The oldest. Like, that was the launch of the company, basically, with that show.
Yeah.
And we started 3 years ago on Earth Day. And just yesterday, we released a whole new season. Yeah. So that's really exciting. And this new season is quite special because it's done in collaboration with the American Institute in Taiwan. And it's been a joy working with them. Yeah. I think the season is really fun, and we got to talk to a lot of really cool people. We're still making them. So, like, by releasing, I just mean that we announced it. So the first episode of the new season was out yesterday, and we're still producing the new ones.
So the show is like more on environmental issues.
Yes, environment and sustainability. So the host, he's an environmental researcher focusing on energy, ocean, and waste. So those are the keywords that we love talking about.
Yeah. And I do have a question. For these shows, when it's English based, where is the context and background? Is it in Taiwan or elsewhere?
Not necessarily. So for Waste Not, Why Not? It's not about Taiwan at all. We'll talk about Taiwan when it makes sense to. So for example, like in Waste Not, Why Not? And early on, there was an episode about plastic straws. At the time, this was like, mid 2019. The banning of plastic straw was a big conversation. And so we talked about what was happening globally. But then we'll use Taiwan as a case study because so Taiwan banned plastic straws in July 2019, and that's a very, very progressive move in comparison to the world. So we had to talk about it. We also, for Taiwan, we also talked about Gogoro. Gogoro is very important. Gogoro, the electric vehicle company, that's also, I think they call themselves a battery company now. But we talked to the lead engineer who laid out the national grid, and that's the national grid became the world's first national grid. Also really important when you talk about, system change. Other times we talked to, when we talked to about food, we went into a food lab in San Francisco. Nothing about Taiwan at all. Actually, in 2020, we attended this very big science conference called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We were one of the 10 podcast teams to go. Other teams were, The Economist, Bloomberg, Discovery, and some other indie podcasts as well. And I remember there were people who were very confused about the fact that we were from Taiwan, but we didn't talk about Taiwan. But I think that was what I really do want to see more shows like that coming out of Taiwan, that we're engaging in global conversations, in global kind of progressive values. But it's not all about us. But it still kind of shows our participation, our perspective, and it shows one of our strengths, but without saying Taiwan, Taiwan, Taiwan. For that, we go to Taiwan Take and Metalhead Politics, which is all about Taiwan.
I think it's very cool because it's almost like made in Taiwan, but it doesn't have to be about Taiwan. And it's just like, Ghost Island Media is a company in Taiwan, but you guys can produce programs around for around the world. And that's very important because production can take place in any place. And then you bring the team over and then just create the content that the client wants. So it's very important in that soft skill coordination field.
Yeah. I think Taiwan has always been very strong at OEM. Yeah. And the last, 20 years, there's been this emphasis on having our own, I don't want to say having our own IP because that sounds so jargony, but have something that's ours, right? So that we're not just the OEM production pipeline. We're not just the supply chain for it, that it comes from us, that is our branding.
Yeah. Do you ever get tired of doing so many things? This is so irrelevant, but it's just popped out of my mind because it's like, you're always on the run, right? Like go, go, go. So many productions, so many plans and all that.
Yeah, but thankfully I have really good colleagues. So, and that makes it really fun too, because then you're in this together. You're kind of fighting together and like doing something cool together. And in the end, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, right? If a project fails, you still learn something from it, and then you do it again, do it better next time, and that's okay.
Is there anything else you would like to add that we didn't cover before we end this episode?
No, I think we covered so much. Yeah. Or is there anything you wanted to ask that we forgot?
I want to understand how you guys make money. Because I know that you take projects from clients, right? So they pay you guys. But then after the show releases, podcast is not really a media that is creating a lot of money yet, right? At least in Taiwan.
Yeah, so there's several revenue streams from that, and it has to be a mix at this point.
Okay.
So one of them is crowdfunding. Actually, is one. So, and crowdfunding is tricky because they work really well for some shows and not as well for others. And in Canada, like, I think like at least 10% of listeners have given money to their favorite shows.
Yeah.
So if you have a massive base, you can have a good income.
Yes.
Crowdfunding, selling merchandise and ticket sales is another one. We're like, actually putting on events on its own is quite expensive. And then it's branded content and sponsorship. So advertising, advertising dollars that come in, or sponsorships for or branded projects, or so. The French project and this season of Wait Not Why Not, just this season, not the entire show, but this season. So that's a brand, and we're in collaboration with different agencies. So it's a mix. It has to be a mix at this point. Yeah. But I think, if you have a show that it pulls in, hundred thousands or million viewers, then that advertising money actually adds up.
Got it. So that means you have to put advertisement in there before it releases, right?
Yeah, there's two kinds. One is
Yeah.
the direct sales advertising that, like, for
Mhm.
example, if like if I'm selling this water bottle,
Yeah.
and then I want to place ads on your show, that I'm
Yeah.
like making, then we're talking about how much it costs, right? Like you're talking to me face to face. There's
Yes.
that, and then there's the other, which is the dynamic ad insertion, which is that's more like kind of like the ads you see on YouTube, the automated ads. You just say, I want to be in this marketplace. And everybody who's in this marketplace, and then get place ads.
Got it. Okay. Because I do hope you guys will thrive and will be able to make a lot more shows, programs. Because throughout this research time before I interviewed you, I felt like you guys really put a lot of effort in productions, and those shows are great. It's like I know it's professionally made, and so I really hope that it's sustainable. So that's how I thought about that last question for you.
Yeah. We have 11 shows now in the past 3 years, and that is a lot.
Yes,
but some have been limited series. Right. But my hope is now, like, let's do more of existing shows. Let's grow existing shows more and kind of that way. I don't know. We'll see. There's always like topics that we wanted to explore.
Yeah. And especially it's a very different one. So you want to do a separate show for that, huh?
Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I hope this continues for like decades and decades, right?
I know, it's exciting. So how can people find you guys?
Yeah, so we are our website is ghostisland.media. On that, you can then find all of our shows, or in your podcast app, just look for Ghost Island Media and pull up all shows. You should see 11 of them. And we're on social media in different languages. So if you're an English speaker, we're most active on Twitter, and that's at Ghost Island Me. And also Waste Not Why Not has its own Twitter at Waste Not Pod. Me, I'm on Twitter, Emily Y Wu. And our Instagrams are mostly in Mandarin.
That's right.
Yeah. If you're a Mandarin speaker, it's Instagram and Facebook at Ghost Island Me.
Yeah, I will put all the links in the episode notes. So listeners, if you're interested in whatever we just said in this episode, please do give it a click and say hi to Emily. Thank you so much for coming to the show, Emily.
Thank you for having me. For listeners, thank you for listening to the whole thing. Do drop us a line and tell us how you got here. Yeah. And thank you for having me on. I think like I was on yesterday on the Mandarin version and today with the English version. I feel like tomorrow we gotta try to speak French, maybe.
Maybe 10 years later. I need to freshen it up.
It's been such a joy talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Chai with Ping. If you think someone will benefit from this episode, don't forget to share it with them. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you like my show, you can buy me some chai with small donations. Details are in the episode notes. Till next time.